Game of Thrones had the world at its feet, and for good reason. This show had something for everyone. Realistic political intrigue, complex morally gray characters, exceptional dialogue, incredible character arcs, and an intense mystery surrounding the Night King. And it's precisely because of this that the show ended the way it did. Game of Thrones set the bar so high with its first 4 seasons that it became almost impossible to follow up. That is one of the main reasons why so many people aren't willing to rewatch the show. The top-notch quality of seasons 1 to 4 really highlighted the flaws of seasons 5 to 8. This was Game of Thrones, with writing, acting, characters, and world-building as good as anything ever on television. After that was just average writing, at best, and Season 8 was incredibly and massively disappointing. But the biggest reason people don't want to rewatch the show is the lack of payoff. As I said at the beginning of the video, Game of Thrones did a wonderful job of getting viewers hooked on its plot lines. You didn't watch this show because you wanted to know what would happen next. You watched it because you needed to know. That's how powerful Game of Thrones was. For example, the show introduced a new concept to mainstream television: the idea that no one is safe. Seeing Ned Stark get killed genuinely shocked me, because I thought he would be the main character. After his death, I assumed Robb Stark would take his place, and that the story would revolve around his revenge and eventual rise to the Iron Throne. But once again, Martin shattered that expectation, leaving me stunned and unsure of what had just hit me. Up until Game of Thrones, we were used to a single type of narrative. Seeing a show completely dismantle everything we thought we knew was something truly unique. With all that being said, the number one reason people aren't rewatching the show is still the lack of payoff. All that marvelous character building, all the fear created around the Night King, everything was destroyed in just a few episodes. I really don't understand the decision to rush everything so aggressively in the final season. They definitely had the budget and the audience to keep the series going for much longer, and even if the quality had declined, people were still just as obsessed as they were in the beginning. Game of Thrones introduced 2 major plot lines: the threat of the Night King and the battle for the Iron Throne. Both were resolved far too abruptly, without proper build-up or development, as if the creators suddenly decided we need to end everything this season. I've heard rumors that Benioff and Weiss had a deal to write the next Star Wars trilogy at the time, and that this is why they rushed the ending, but I hope that isn't true. That said, I don't blame the writers entirely, nor do I believe everything went downhill, simply because they ran out of source material and had to improvise. D&D made some fantastic additions in the earlier seasons. For example, all the interactions between Arya and Tywin didn't exist in the books, and Littlefinger's chaos as a ladder monologue was also an original creation. D&D clearly understood Martin's world and its dynamics, which is why it hit us like a hammer when they butchered so many key characters in the final season. It felt like they didn't just forget the characters' development, they actively made them dumber than they had ever been. Take Varys, for example. The cunning spy master and master manipulator, once Littlefinger's equal in court intrigue, suddenly became completely straightforward and incapable of spinning words the way he had done effortlessly for over 6 seasons. Watching him openly tell Tyrion he intended to commit treason felt like a mockery of his character. How can you ever enjoy his riddle of power speech, knowing how his story ends? Another example is Tyrion, who famously described himself as someone who knows things and drinks. Apparently, he forgot everything he ever knew. Not only did his character become completely unrecognizable, but he was also the one who exposed Varys for treason, only to later approach Daenerys with the exact same arguments Varys had made. What was the point of betraying him if you ultimately agreed with him? But the biggest disappointment was Jon Snow. All of his traits, everything he endured, were forgotten. Jon Snow had the biggest and most impressive story of all the characters. He started as a bastard, was sent to the Night's Watch, became Lord Commander, died, and was brought back to life. He brought the wildlings south of the Wall, and in the final season we learned that he is actually a Targaryen, and the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. This is why everyone believed Jon Snow was the hero of the story, that he would be the one to kill the Night King and the one who would eventually sit on the Iron Throne. When you portray a character like this, it's only logical for the audience to assume those things. Jon Snow was supposed to matter in the end, and all that buildup was meant to pay off. Instead, Season 8 reduced Jon Snow to a single line: "She is my queen." The man who let the wildlings pass the wall because it was the right thing to do now blindly accepts everything Daenerys does. There was always so much mystery surrounding Jon Snow's parents, and that mystery paid off perfectly when we learned the truth. But that revelation ultimately meant nothing. Jon Snow being resurrected also served no real purpose. The only consequence was that the dragon spared him at the end, but even that didn't matter. Jon could have easily died there and the story would have remained the same. Honestly, I think it would have been better if Jon had died alongside Daenerys. At least then it would have felt poetic. Why did Jon Snow leave at the end? If we put everything into perspective, killing Daenerys was not only the moral thing to do, but also the lawful one. He killed a usurper, a false queen trying to take a throne that wasn't hers. I believe the writers wanted to exile Jon so the audience wouldn't hate him for killing Daenerys, but I think I can speak for most people when I say we were actually relieved that it happened. Based on everything Jon went through, I at least expected him to become king, not Bran. How did Bran become king? This has to be one of the dumbest decisions the writers could have made. The who will sit on the Iron Throne plot was even bigger than the Night King's threat, yet it was handled horribly. Bran's entire arc in the final season was, "I don't want power," only for him to suddenly say, "Why do you think I came all this way?" His entire character arc is fundamentally flawed. Bran was always tied to the Night King, yet he did nothing in that storyline. Somehow, instead, he became involved in the political plot and ended up as king. What was the purpose of becoming the three-eyed raven? Just to reveal Jon's parentage? That would have made sense if Jon being a Targaryen actually mattered. But it didn't. Jon Snow could have remained a bastard until the end, and the story would have played out exactly the same. That makes Bran's entire arc pointless. Why did the Night King mark him? No answer. Everyone thought this would play a major role in the final battle, and it never did. And somehow, this boring, pointless character became king of the Seven Kingdoms. After witnessing 7 seasons of scheming and power struggles over the throne, how did the writers think the best way to resolve it was through a democratic vote? No one even knew Bran, yet everyone instantly agreed with Tyrion. We spent 7 seasons fighting over the Iron Throne, and it was all settled in 5 minutes with unanimous agreement. It felt completely wrong. Imagine watching 8 seasons, spending 74 hours of your life, and waiting 8 years for the conclusion, only to get that ending. It's no wonder people aren't rewatching the show anymore. It felt like a mockery of all the time we dedicated to it. Another major plotline that Game of Thrones completely mishandled was the Night King. Winter is Coming used to carry real weight. It was built up and expanded upon for years. The show did an incredible job foreshadowing the Long Night and establishing the White Walkers as a terrifying threat. We entered that episode with immense expectations, and not even 20% of them were fulfilled. The Night King became the biggest fraud of the entire show. This enigmatic harbinger of winter, death, and destruction, who even managed to claim a dragon, died in one of the most anticlimactic ways imaginable. Not because it served the story, but simply to subvert expectations. This is the core problem. You don't hype up a battle, foreshadow a hero, develop a storyline millions of people are invested in, and then suddenly say, "Gotcha! You thought Jon or Bran would kill the Night King. Too bad, it's Arya." People expected Jon Snow or Bran to kill the Night King for a reason. Why spend 7 years building anticipation and foreshadowing, only to do a complete 180 at the last moment? This isn't even a red herring, it's pointless, and it destroys 7 years of character development for both Jon and Bran. Considering how significant Winter is Coming was, I expected at least 1 full season dedicated to the Long Night, followed by another season dealing with its aftermath and the final struggle for the Iron Throne. Instead, everything became rushed and painfully obvious. What was once elegant foreshadowing turned into lazy writing. I won't even comment on the countless plot lines left unresolved, like the Iron Bank debt. And this is why rewatching Game of Thrones feels pointless. It can't even function as a comfort show. With every rewatch, you notice how much worse it becomes and how often it contradicts or outright forgets what was established in earlier seasons. Many popular shows have had disappointing endings, but none compare to Game of Thrones and how brutally it massacred everything it spent years building. In the end, just like Daenerys, HBO used the dragon to destroy the series and the legacy it created.